Hello again. If you've arrived at Module 2, that means that you have successfully submitted a set of unpacked standards that your instructor has approved of for you to work with as you continue to write your single content area, grade level, lesson design. The objectives for Module 2 are to design broad, reusable objectives that both students and families can understand. The reason we do this is so that we're not writing objectives for every single lesson that we write. We want to write them broadly, and so we can use them over and over again in that content area and that grade level, and perhaps even across content area and grade levels. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. Your tasks for this module are to read, watch, and use all the resources in this module. And then your assignment is on the lesson design template, which I'll talk about in just a second. Write 2 to 3 broad, reusable objectives that families and students can understand based on your unpacked standards. Remember, you are writing only a 15 to 40-minute lesson depending on your grade level. We're not writing a unit yet. One compact lesson. If you're working with kindergarten, first, second graders, you're going to be somewhere in the 10 to 15-minute range. If you're working with middle school lesson design, you're probably going to be closer to 40 minutes. Then we will submit this assignment in the assignment Dropbox by the due date and time. And as with the first module and all the continuing modules, as long as you have that first attempt in by the due date, we'll continue to work together and get it to where we're both satisfied with it. And then, of course, I have a checking for understanding for you. So let's go ahead and get into Module 2. So in Module 2, you'll find the checking for understanding, which you can do before or after as you like. The lesson design template, which I'll show you in just a second. Another piece that you might find interesting, this is 8 things students absolutely need to learn. This is a little video that was made by some real live students, and it's very interesting to look at. You might want to take a look. Measurable verbs for blooms, we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to do some direct instruction and unpack standards to objectives. And then I'm going to show you an example of what those would look like on an actual lesson design template. I also included here a Bloom's taxonomy written specifically for digital tasks. If you are going to be using digital materials in this lesson or any lessons going forward, this has a kind of a different way to look at it and some verbs that make more sense with using digital tasks. And then, of course, your assignment Dropbox. First thing I want to do is look at our lesson design. This is a lesson design template for all of the MAT students. If you are writing a single lesson, whether you are an elementary graduate student or a special education graduate student, you're going to use this template when you write one design. You use this template for this course, you're going to use this template for all your methods / practicum courses, and if you're writing single lessons for your student teaching, you're going to use this template. So get familiar with this template. This is the one we're always going to use. So you see at the top of the template there's some basic information, your name, what school you're at, your host teacher, those kinds of things. It's very important when you turn these in that you tell me your grade level and the length of the lesson so that I have an idea of whether that lesson might be too long or too short for those students. It's the context for me in helping you design a good lesson is very important. And then you'll see here where this says topic of lesson, and you will only have a lesson topic if you are doing a lesson. When we move on further in the course and you're doing integrated work, we won't have a topic anymore, we'll have a big idea, but for right now you can have a topic. And of course I understand for many of you we're pretending to write this lesson, but we still want to get up in our heads and think about what we might need as far as materials. List your standards. Not your unpacked standards, the actual standards that you unpacked from. And then you'll see that backwards design lesson planning happens in 3 stages. We call it backwards design because in the past what happened a lot is that people would design activities first. And we don't want to go that way because that is actually backwards. We want to start with our objectives. So stage 1 is our objectives. What do we want students to be able to know and do? And that's what we're going to do in this module. Then the next thing we want to think about is, once we know what it is that we want students to know and do, our objectives, how are we going to know that they know and can do them? So then we assess. Then we go to stage 3 and we think about, well, what do they need to practice? And what do they need to learn to be able to demonstrate that they can know and do the things that we want them to know and to do? And so that's why it's called backwards design lesson planning. That's from the Understanding by Design module. But we're going to focus on stage 1. So make sure that you're using this template, and then down at the bottom of this template, which you don't need to do right now, we're going to talk about closure. How do you wrap up that lesson? What's your review and summary? How is this lesson sensitive to cultural and language issues? And then artifacts of student work, which you obviously will not include for this because this is a pretend lesson. So make sure that you are using this template. What we're going to do in this section of the course is we're going to start on the template and you're just going to add to it. So we're going to do stage 1 in this module, then you'll add stage 2 and stage 3 in the next 2 modules. If you have any questions about the template, send your instructor an email or a tweet. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is some measurable verbs. And here's a good piece that I have for you. It's in the module about measurable verbs. And we talked about being able to measure things. And in the last module, I talked a little bit about this idea of saying a student will know, and we don't really know what that means, or a student will appreciate. And so what we want to do here, this is much like your flip book on one page. But if we look down here at knowledge, what do we mean by a student has knowledge of something? Well, we might mean they can list, they can name, they recall, they can relate. Maybe we just want them to underline some things. So we want to be very explicit with the verbs we're using. The verbs are very, very important. What do I mean if I want them to analyze something? Do I really want them to, there's lots of ways we can analyze something. Do I really want them to differentiate it from something else? Do I want them to question it? Do I want them to compare it? We have to really think about what we mean, because when we're assessing, we need to be very specific about what we want them to assess. And when we're having them practice in stage 3, we want to be very specific about how we're having them practice. If my goal, if my objective is that they be able to distinguish one thing from another, and then I assess them on their ability to categorize, and I give them practice with questioning, I'm doing the same type of thinking. And so I have what's called alignment. Now, the opposite could also be true. Perhaps I really want, my objective is for students to apply something. That's my objective. But I'm going to, I designed some sort of assessment where they just list things, okay? That doesn't match. It's not the same type of thinking. Especially then if I'm having them restating practices. So we want to make sure that our objectives, our assessments, and our opportunities to learn in stage 3 all align with the same types of thinking and doing, so that we're not all over the place. It's not fair to kids. It'd be like my objective for you to be able to drive a bus, and I'm going to assess you on driving a bus, but I only let you practice driving a car. It would be an unfair situation for you. So this is another resource you have for looking at those measurable verbs. So what I want to do now is to get into some instruction about exactly what I want you to do. And that is in this set of slides that you will also find in Module 2. And we want to move now from those unpacked standards that you did in the last module to writing some outcomes. Student learning outcomes, you might be hearing them referred to out in your school. Objectives in the Understanding by Design method. So we started with our unpacked standards. And remember, I put those verbs that we wanted to focus on in red. So we want students to name the important characteristics of citizenship and explain that it's important for citizens to fulfill their responsibilities and some other things here. Now remember, we're talking about a 15 to 40 minute lesson depending on the age of your students that you're imagining. This is a lot here. So obviously I have too much here for a short 15-minute lesson, especially if I wanted to start talking about citizenship with younger children. So, but I have my unpacked standards, so I now have something I can work with to start writing my objectives or my student learning outcomes. So if I wanted to use all of these unpacked standards, which would be too many for a short 15-minute lesson, but just for example here, on the left would be the unpacked standard that I wrote in the last module, and on the right is the measurable objective that I could write for stage 1. So you see I moved from name the important characteristics of citizenship, which has a certain kind of wording, to I can name the important characteristics of citizenship. I have changed it to put the responsibility on the learner, and I have made it active. So a student can understand this too. Remember, we wanted them to be broad. I can name important characteristics as broad. And kids can understand this and families can understand this. Okay, and I'll show you how they start looking more broad when we put them on the lesson design. You can see that I have put things together. If you look down at this one, establish, explain, and apply criteria useful in selecting political leaders. I changed it over here so that it's active. I can select leaders. Okay? This is what I want them to do. Because here I've taken the explain, establish, and apply criteria. I've made that very broad. I can use this over and over again for a multitude of objectives, assessments, and lessons. I can establish, explain, and apply criteria. That could be to almost anything. So you see now I have an objective I can use over and over again. And here I apply that specifically to selecting leaders. So this is how you move from your impact standards to your measurable objective. Your objective is what is going to appear on your lesson design template. So you might end up with a lesson design template that looks like this. This would be for 6th grade for a 45-minute lesson, and I can tell that because I have put that information here for me. Okay. So I have stage 1. Here's the standard. A student should have the knowledge and skills necessary to participate effectively as an informed and responsible citizen. I need more than just the number of the standard, please, so I can help you. So write it out. Remember, this is not the unpacked standard, this is the original standard. And then I have my stage 1 objectives. I can explain the value of community service, I can discuss issues, build consensus, and vote, I can select leaders, I can solve problems, I can resolve conflicts. And you can see these are very broad and reusable. I could use these objectives over and over again in a variety of situations with a variety of lessons. And that's what we want to go for. It's also clear. The students know they're going to have to explain something, they're going to have to discuss something. They're going to be voting, they're selecting something, they're solving problems, and they're resolving conflicts. So it's clear what students and kids are supposed to do. So the last thing I want to share with you is this piece is what it would look like. This is another example of a completed lesson design. And you see I've added all the information at the top. I'm telling the reader that it's for 6th grade, 45 students, and it's going to be 45 minutes. The topic is democratic participation. I've come up with some materials I thought I might need. And then I have the standard that I took these from. Students understand the roles individuals play in a democracy. And I have those objectives. I can name important characteristics of an idea. See how I broadened that? I made it very broad now. I can name important characteristics of an idea. I can use this objective in math. I can use this objective in science. I can use this objective in writing. I can explain the value of an idea, and I can discuss ideas, build consensus, and vote. These are very broad and reusable. I can write these kinds of objectives, and I can use them again and again and again without having to go through the process. And that's what we really want you to go for. Take some practice, but remember, just like with the Module 1, submit something and you and I can have a discussion about it together. So let's review what's in Module 2 for you. So there's your checking for understanding. There's the lesson design template. This 8 things is very interesting. Make sure you watch it. Measurable verbs from Bloom's. The slides I just went through. The example I just showed you of a broad, reusable, understandable objectives. And then the taxonomy for digital tests. And then you have, once again, the place to submit your work. Lesson design takes practice and it takes some experience, which some of you don't have much of right now. So what you really need to do is just really kind of jump into this process. Remember, it is about the process, not about the products. We're going to work on the products together. What's important is that you engage in this process of thinking about objectives being broad and reusable and measurable. So my best advice to you right now is just jump in and take a whack at it. Then I will give you feedback and we'll progress on it together. Remember, anything that's turned in by 9 a.m., I will get back to you by lunchtime that day. And as long as you hit that first due date, you're not late. If you have any questions, send your instructor an email or a tweet.